CPD is unable to effectively determine what records exist, make it possible to know whether it has identified and produced all relevant records. And I have come across this one hilariously through FOIA, but I want to hear your comments on that one before I tell some stories.
So I think that's critical. I want to take a quick step back to kind of position that in the framework here as I see it. I really think there are three components of the process and the problem with CPD's handling of its records. And those have to do with, when it comes to subpoenas, those have to do with the intake of the subpoenas, the intake of requests for records, the identification of records in the department's possession, and then the production of them, like the mechanics of getting them out the door, the people asking for them. So there are things to be said about the buckets on both ends of that spectrum, but to take first the one that you ask about here, the identification, that's the hardest one. And that is the one which is least susceptible to kind of hundreds solutions in my mind. The issues around identification have to do with the fact that there are many, many hundreds of kinds of records that are potentially implicated by criminal prosecution and related civil litigation. Those are stored sometimes electronically and sometimes in paper. When they are stored electronically, they are stored across a number of different sort of poorly integrated layers of legacy data systems. When they're stored in paper, they're stored in very diffuse physical locations, different filing systems, everything from all of the things you can imagine, the sort of water-stained banker's boxes on the floor, file cabinets in basements, all of those things are true. So the point there in that observation is to say that, across all of those different places where responsive records might be, the department simply doesn't have a good way to make sure that it is gathering everything relevant, all of the information to which somebody is entitled from all of the places it might exist. The obligations are really broad. So we outline some of the specific legal obligations in the report. Broadly, these obligations are of constitutional proportion. People have a due process right to information in the possession of law enforcement, which may be exculpatory in a criminal case. They are entitled to information going to the credibility of witnesses, including police officers who might testify against them. There are state statutes in the Code of Criminal Procedure, as well as court rules obligating the department to do exactly this, to identify the information it has in its possession and to produce it to the people who are entitled to it. So the identification really is key. I think there's a temptation to imagine that for digital records or for records which are created now going forward, as we talked about, there's a temptation to think that that will be easier. And I think one would like to imagine sort of a Google search equivalent to a record system, right? Where you can basically type in somebody's name and you get, a result, which is relevant records. And it's frankly, nowhere near that straightforward or effective. And that has much to do with the way that the electronic systems are set up and the way that the records stored in those systems are indexed. So, for example, and I know that this is all information that you know from your many FOIA, from your career as a FOIA requester, but attached to, let's take, for example, a situation in which one individual is arrested for one crime, and that crime is, and prosecution moves forward. That incident, that person and that incident will have associated with it a slew of different identifiers and identifying numbers. So that person will have an IR number, an individual record number, which is associated with their fingerprints. The arrest will have a CB, or a central booking number. The case will have a records division number, which identifies the incident. And that is literally just like one person being arrested, right, for one offense. And there are a number of other things which might conceivably be attached as well. Now, not every record that CPD possesses related to that person or that incident is going to have any one of those identifiers across all records. So you can't simply, for example, search by RD number. Not all relevant records are necessarily going to be indexed by RD number. And so I say all of that kind of by way of an example. I think the problems with identifying paper records are pretty discernible from a common sense perspective. You can't possibly know what's in all those banker's boxes or file cabinet drawers. And so I say all of that just to say that that there are important challenges with the electronic records as well.